Hi, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Bree. Today's video, we're going to be going through all the books I read in the month of October. I think this was my best reading month yet, and I have a lot of books to talk to you about. So I thought I'd organize them from least spooky to most spooky. Now, this is subjective, and so don't take my word for it. I am going to be talking through a lot of horror books as well, so as always, just check any trigger warnings you may need. Take care of yourself, look them up if you need to. But this list is going to go from least spookiest to spookiest. Just because of the holiday season, I thought that'd be fun. So the least spooky book that I have is The Grace of Wild Things by Heather Fawcett. This is a middle grade book, and it is kind of a retelling of Anne of Green Gables, but with magic. This is following our main character, Grace, who leaves her orphanage because she no longer wants to be there, and she wants to set out and find a witch to teach her how to be a witch because she knows she has magical powers, and she's determined to find this witch in the woods. And the story kicks off by her finding the witch's house and striking a deal with the witch that she will complete all the spells in the witch's grimoire by a year. If she does, she will get to be able to apprentice under this witch, and if she doesn't, then the witch gets to take her powers. This is one of those retellings that's very true to the retelling. It does take its own spin with things. It does change some of the elements because there is magic and stuff like that, but a lot of the plot points of Anne of Green Gables is within this. So if you're someone who really likes that and are intrigued by a retelling, I feel like this one was a pretty true retelling to Anne of Green Gables, just make it magical. I personally had some issues with Anne of Green Gables only because I am not a huge contemporary reader, and so just reading like day-to-day life isn't always the most exciting to me. And so I thought this one would be fun because I also read Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia Fairies, which is Heather Fawcett's adult book, and I really loved it. So I wanted to try this one, and I did enjoy it, and I think it's really good for that middle grade age. It just wasn't my favorite personally from the Anne of Green Gables side because I felt it was still a little slow, but I think that the messages in here were really sweet, and just seeing Grace become friends with the kids in the town and the way that she kind of handles magic and the way her and the witch grow in her relationship, all those things were really sweet to read. So I enjoyed it, but I just think I'm not the target audience for it. I still think it was fun and just a fun little cozy, sweet, witchy time. Now, I will say they are dealing with some topics that are a little bit harder. There's talk of grief and loss and stuff like that. So it's not like a wholly cozy book, but I think it does it in a very approachable way for a middle grade. So that's The Grace of Wild Things by Heather Fawcett. I enjoyed, but not a favorite. The next two in the cozy ranking, I kind of didn't know which one to go first. From here on out, it's not necessarily cozy, but they're not spooky either. They're just fantasy, so, you know, with fantasy, a lot of times comes some, like, dark elements, so I wouldn't put them wholly in cozy. But that is A Gathering of Shadows by V.E. Schwab. This is the second in the Darker Shade of Magic series. In this, we're following off after the events of the first one, and we're in a tournament type setting. If you don't know, the series itself is following different Londons, and we're following Kel, our main character, as he's able to go between different Londons as a messenger of sorts for the crown, and he gets into some shenanigans and things goes down, and this one is just jumping off right from the end of that one. The thing I liked about this one was we were exploring more of the dynamics between characters, especially Kel and the prince. We got to explore that dynamic a little bit more and deal with some things that were changed from the first one, and so I think it was really cool to see that. We also get to see another character's growth and progression, and then also we see a lot of characters that make some poor decisions, but I was here for it. And we meet more characters who I believe are going to have more impact throughout the rest of the books, which is only one, the third book. So all that to say is I enjoyed it. I know for some people they don't really like this one because it does kind of have that middle book syndrome where it's just setting up for the third book. A ton of this is just set up, but I enjoy being with these characters and seeing how the world expanded. That I really enjoyed it. I had a good time. I would say it's still about a 4-star for me, not a full 5. It's one of those books where not a lot happens, so if you need something to really be progressing the plot, it does progress, but like at the end. So it's a lot of build up. But I loved it. I liked the tournament setting. I'm not a huge tournament person, but in this, it worked for me. So that is A Gathering of Shadows by V. Schwab. Then we're coming to my first 5-star book of the month, and I'm so happy I read this because it was so wildly out of my comfort zone. I'm just going to show it to you. It is The Adventures of Mina al-Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty. The reason this is so outside my comfort zone is because it's a pirate story and I'm not big into seafaring tales. There's only been a couple that I really enjoy. And so I had picked this up because I had some credits from Book of the Month. I was intrigued because it had good reviews, but I knew this wasn't really my thing. And now I wish I had a nice copy because this is one of my favorite fantasy books right now. I just had so much fun with this. While it is a pirate story, it's not just a seafaring story. So I think that's what I liked about it. So in this, we're following Amina, and she has been out of the game for a while. She has a daughter, and she just is laying low. She's approached by a woman who wants her to go find her granddaughter. And she says her granddaughter's been kidnapped, and she wants her to go find her. And she's offering her just a huge sum of money that Amina can't turn down because of how much it is. So she gets the gang back together and they go set off on this adventure, and it turns out to be way more than they thought, as that always happens in fantasy books. I really love books that deal with mythology but like have their own take. Shannon Chakraborty even says at the end of her book that she's not necessarily taking from true stories, she's kind of making things her own. But that's what I love about reading fantasy stories, is you kind of get the feel of this world and this magic and the mythology of an area of the world. And this is taking place around the Indian Ocean, and it's kind of a historical setting as well, although it's like loosely based, as I've said. And I really loved that. I loved seeing all the magic and stories that are being passed down, and I loved Amina as a character. I liked that we were following an older character, and you know, she's going back and she's having to do these things that she used to be able to do really well. She's like having to fight someone, and she's now like feeling the creaks in her back and stuff from old injuries and like in her legs. It's just so fun to see that, to see a character who's now struggling to kind of like keep up like they used to, but has to nonetheless. And I really love the found family in here. That was amazing, which I'm always a sucker for. And I just loved every character. I loved the banter. I would really highly recommend the audiobook as well. I thought that was fantastic. I was just so surprised that a pirate story could work for me. And yeah, I just absolutely loved it, and I would recommend. I used to have City of Brass, and I actually unhauled it because I just never had gotten to it, and I didn't know if it was going to be for me, and now I'm really regretting it. It's one of the only times I've regretted getting rid of a book. Most of the time I don't. And now I'm going to have to get it again so I can read it. But that's Adventures of Mina al-Sarafi. It's going to be a series, and from the way this is setting up, I feel like it's going to be a 5-book series. So I'm really into it. So that's The Adventures of Mina al-Sarafi. Highly recommend. Then we have one that I'm just going to go through really quickly because honestly I have no real thoughts on it. And that's As Death Draws Near by Annalee Huber. This is the 5th one in the Lady Darby mystery series. I've been enjoying the series as a whole. I really loved the first one, and I enjoyed the second one, and then this just kind of like lost enjoyment for me a little bit as time goes on. The mysteries are okay and they're interesting and I like them, and I will continue because I still have like a ton of them, but they're just like not the same as my Rex and Sloan. I read these and I love every single one. These ones I have some wins, some misses, and this one was just kind of okay for me. We're following nuns and a mystery there. I just felt like I was like kind of glazing over while reading it. Like I didn't really feel attached to anything that was happening in this one. I like the main couple, but I would say that I'm sometimes wish they would get past some of the same problems they've been having since the beginning. I wish we could move on from those issues, especially because in this they're now together, so like, you know, why are we still dealing with the same problems from book 1? That's all my thoughts on this one. It's not very spooky, but I put it on here because, you know, it's dealing with murder, so that's spooky, but overall like not the most spooky, and I don't feel like there was a lot of on-page graphic scenes that I can remember, but don't quote me on that because I honestly don't remember like most of this book. It's one of those where I read and the plot's just like out of my head now. Okay, we're getting into spookier territory, though this one I would still say is on the edge of, the vibes are just more like spooky, but I wouldn't say the actual book is super spooky. And this one was another one that was kind of a surprise for me, but that's One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This one I had picked up a long time ago and I hadn't got to it. It's a gothic fantasy story, a romance as well. I would say it's like probably about a 3.5 to 4 star for me. So we're following this girl, and basically in this world there is this fever that children can get, and if they get it then they get infected by magic and they are taken to the castle and executed. And so it's very bad to have this because magic is like not allowed. Our main girl, she ends up getting infected and her family hides her, and so she's been going her whole life trying to hide this, and I believe she's like 19 at the start of this, or maybe in her 20s, I don't remember. So at the beginning of the book, she has to go to the castle with her cousin and stuff. There's different things that happen that lead her to have to go to the castle where she's trying to hide her secret from a lot of people. The magic system, there is magic, but they're through these like providence cards that they call them, and only people who have them can use them, and that's the only like acceptable way to use magic. The magic system is very confusing, very interesting, and hard to explain. So basically she ends up working with some people to try to beat the king in getting rid of this magic, and yeah, it's really interesting. There's like a voice inside her head, because whoever gets infected, they get magic. And so like, her thing is she has someone living inside her head. So she like talks to him all the time. And I liked that aspect of it. I thought that had some fun banter back and forth. The romance, I would say, is nothing like amazing. I don't think it's gonna be one that I remember forever, but I just had fun with it. And the end of the book had a twist that I saw coming, but also like I still want to know what happened. So it's one of those where I think it was good and it wasn't going to be a favorite, but I now have to know what's happening. So I'm currently reading the second one. I have good things to say about it. I think it was a fun gothic type fantasy romance, interesting magic system, and I just had a good time with it. It was one of those books that I picked up at the beginning of the month. I just needed something brain off to read and just like be sucked into a story, and I really got just sucked in right away. So that's One Dark Window. Now we're into like the horror section of this stack, and the least spooky of the horror in my opinion was How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. It was also the least favorite of these stack of books because I read this for my horror reading vlog. If you haven't seen, I read 4 horror books in that time, and this was one of them. It is Grady Hendrix's new release. It came out in January of this year. It's a story of these 2 siblings who lost their parents in a car crash. They are coming to deal with the house and kind of figure out who gets what and just take care of the things you have to after your parents pass. And they have a strained relationship. They don't really talk, and so they're coming back together, and there's a lot of things that they have to deal with. It's a lot about grief. There's like a haunted house type element, and their mom was obsessed with puppets, so there's also like puppets and dolls and stuff like that in this story. This is my least favorite Grady horror. This is my least favorite Grady Hendrix that I've read, and it's also one of my least favorite horrors that I've read. It just really did nothing for me. The thing I like about Grady Hendrix is how he can write characters and how he can make you feel so strongly emotions towards different characters, like anger or sadness and stuff, and this one I just like really felt nothing throughout the whole thing. I think the exploration into grief was interesting, and the book is like told in parts that are going with the stages of grief, and so I thought that was cool. But overall, the story itself, I didn't care where it was going, and I just didn't have a lot of connection to either of the main characters. After the first like third, I was kind of over it, but I kept reading, and it wasn't like horrible. I just didn't like it. That's sad to me because I really love Grady Hendrix, so I will be picking up more from him. It's just this one was not it for me. So this one, I guess, is not a horror, but it's a dark academia, and that's Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. This is the first in the Alex Stern series. Now, the reason I'm putting it this low in the spooky side is there are a ton of trigger warnings in this for sexual assault and more, but this is following our main character who is offered this opportunity basically by this man. He offers her to go to Yale to like work in this undercover society that like basically watches over the other secret societies at Yale, and she takes it because she gets another chance. She gets to go to school for free, and she gets housing and a way to like turn her life around. The timeline in this is very strange. So in one of it, she's flashing back to when she's training with this guy Darlington, who's like her mentor, and then there's like present day where Darlington is no longer there, but you don't know why or where he went, and you are following her as this murder happens, and she kind of has to figure out what happened and why, and if it's connected to these societies. There's a couple things. One, the trigger warnings in this, there are a couple instances of that on the page, and some's off page, but there's a decent amount, and that was just not my thing. It's not something I like to read about in detail. And with dark academia, the point of that is to go into it a little bit to get to the dark side of it, and I prefer not to like go there with it. But the main reason that it was only like a 3-star for me is because of the plotting. The pace was really weird because you're jumping back and forth, but you're not just jumping back to like one timeline or another. It'll be like present day, and then it'll be like winter of last year, and then it'll be present day, and then it'll go back to like summer of that year. It's jumping around to like weird points, and it was hard to follow where we were in the story. And then you're also getting another perspective at some point, and that just kind of threw me for a loop. It just was like too many moving parts that trying to keep up with it just was a little difficult to know where I was in the story. I like the magic system, but I think there was so much info dumping about the different schools, because basically there's like different schools of magic that can do different things, and she's in charge of making sure they're all doing things the way that they're supposed to by the book. And so every time she goes into one, you're getting like information on that specific society. And while they're different, I just felt like every time you were just getting so much information about what they do that it was hard for me to hold on to all that information to remember why they're important and who they are. And I found when the mystery was unraveling, remembering who different people were, they were all blending together for me. That being said, it wasn't bad. I can see why people like this. I can see if you're really into dark academia, this could be for you. It just wasn't my cup of tea. I think I will continue on because the way it ended, I'm interested in to see how that fantasy story continues. If we were continuing in the same capacity for the next one, I don't think I would like it as much, but the way it leaves off, I am interested to see how that goes, and I'm hoping trigger warnings for like sexual assault and stuff are less. Yeah, just not my cup of tea. Okay, we have 4 more books left. So the next one I have is The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher. I buddy read this with my friend Karen at Roving Reader. This was a T. Kingfisher horror. I've read a lot of her fantasy, and I think I've only read like 2 or 3 of her horror. And this one I know is the one that people have loved the most, so the one that's mostly talked about, and I now can see why people like it. It's about a woman who is getting a divorce, so she has to move, and she doesn't want to move back home with her mom, and her uncle offers for her to come live with him and help him run his museum. It's called the Glory to God Museum of Natural Wonders, Curiosities, and Taxidermy. So it's just a very odd museum in this small town, and she agrees to go because her and her uncle have a really good relationship, and so she goes to help him because he's getting older too and he needs the help. And while she's there, he ends up leaving for a bit, and she and the guy next door who runs a coffee shop find a hole in the wall that leads to another universe, and it goes from there. There are things I love about this one. It's got T. Kingfisher's writing and quirks. I think if you've read a lot of T. Kingfisher, some people say her voice kind of blends together so that characters seem similar, and I will say this reminded me a lot of The House with Good Bones in terms of the character, but yet there are differences and stuff, and the plot itself is so vastly different that I didn't mind that. I think it gives me a little bit of nostalgia and coziness. It feels like I already kind of know the world in some ways, so I like that about it. Her name's Kara, but her uncle calls her Carrot, so she's called Carrot throughout, and I think it's really sweet. I really loved seeing a relationship between a niece and uncle, and just like a really wholesome relationship. It was so sweet to see them interact and how he is with her. It was just really sweet. Now for the horror side of things, I liked it, but the horror isn't my version of horror. I'm not a very big, I don't know if you would call this sci-fi horror, but like alternate realities, dimensions, worlds, that kind of thing has never really intrigued me a ton. Like I've said in the past, I'm more of a creature horror type story or a haunted house, and so this one I think works for a lot of people, and I can see why. It just didn't fully work for me. But that being said, I would say it's probably for me like a 3.5. I had a good time, and I liked exploring while we were exploring, but I just, at the end of the day, like I think it's not gonna sit with me for super long. So I think if you like kind of a sci-fi alternate world horror and you've read T. Kingfisher's fantasy and you kind of want to try, I would recommend it. I know it's worked for a lot of people. So that being said, I enjoyed it. I would recommend it. It just wasn't wholly my thing, which is fine. This one is going in 3rd spot for spooky because I think it has a lot of spooky elements. It doesn't fully go there the way the other ones do. So that is Lone Woman by Victor LaValle. This is a historical horror. One of the things about Victor LaValle is he kind of writes in like a mesh of genres. He doesn't really stick to one. He kind of makes his own, which I really like about it. So I picked this up for the horror reading vlog and also to participate in Black Halloween. And this one has been one I saw come out and I was interested in, but I've also really wanted to try Victor Laval. I really want to try the Changeling, but I picked up this one because this one was available and it seemed really interesting and it worked for one of the prompts. So this is about our main character Adelaide, and at the beginning of the book, she is leaving her house and she is setting it on fire and leaving, and you don't know why, but she has a suitcase that is really heavy and she's bringing it with her, and she makes her way to Montana where they're basically giving away land, and if after 3 years you can show that you can tend the land and make it sustainable as a homestead, you are allowed to keep the land. Basically the government was just giving away land to people, and this was something a lot of like women specifically too tried to do because it was a way to kind of make their own way in the world. So she picks this remote town in Montana, and she goes, and while she's on the road, there's also this family that's traveling with her that is a mom and 3 sons. They disappear in the middle of the night and she doesn't know what happens to them, and so you're kind of dealing with the mystery of like what happened to this family. Then you're also dealing with the mystery of what is in her trunk and why she's so protective of it, because as she's traveling, you just see her more and more not want people to touch this case, and just she's very obsessed with it. And then you're also getting this whole storyline of basically homesteading in this really harsh environment because the winters are hard. They're also very isolated, and so you have to do a lot on your own, and you also have to rely on your neighbors, but everything's very spread out and very far away, and you have nothing when you come there. So it's also about her just trying to make her own in this world and making friends, and she meets some other women in the town, and it's about her friendship and stuff with them, and I really, really enjoyed it. This is also a 4-star, not quite a 5, because I think that there were some parts that were slow for me because we were following the homesteading side of it more than I kind of wanted to. I thought it was interesting, but I really wanted more of the horror stuff. Now, the end of the book really goes there in terms of horror, and I really liked the end. I'm so happy I read Victor Laval because I can just tell he's going to be an author that's for me. I'm really excited to try The Changeling because I think that premise sounds like even more of my thing. But this had everything I really like in it. It's got historical, it's got commentary about a lot of things in here. I really think he did a good job, and I also really liked the way he wrote Adelaide. You know, sometimes men writing women characters can be hit or miss, but I think in this instance, she felt like a very real character to me. Also, the audiobook for this, I would highly recommend. I really like the narrator. I've definitely read from her before, but I can't remember her name. I'll have to put up on the screen the audiobook narrator's name, but I really liked her and I would recommend it for this book specifically. Then in that same horror vlog for Black Queen as well, I read Ring Shout by P.J. Clark. This one is second to the top of most spooky because we're dealing with KKK members who are infested with like demons. It's very gruesome, very like gory and action based, and yeah, so just definitely goes high on that spooky side. Now, I have read P.J. Clark's historical mystery, A Master of Jinn, really loved it, and so I've been wanting to try this one because everyone really loves this horror novella. It's really short. It's a total of 180 pages, so very, very short. It's basically what I said, following these women who are fighting these KKK members who are monsters. So there are like some that are monsters that get infested and some that are just regular humans, and they're going after like the monsters, but it's just very much commentary on hate and how hate can infest you. It has a lot to say and it packs so much in just a little novella. I really liked our main character Mercy. This is also in 1915, so it's historical, so you know I like that. And yeah, I just really liked it, and I would say it's about a 4-star as well for me. The reason it's not higher is mainly because of the way you're just dropped in and run with it. I know P.J. Clark can really build a world. I've seen that in A Master of Jinn and how he just weaves so much into a story. And because this is a novella, I just wanted it to be longer. I wanted to understand a little bit more about the world and the backstory of how they came to be, because while we know how like KKK members came to be, I want to understand more of this alternate world that he's building. Just a little bit more world building, and I would have really loved it because I think that there was so much that I kind of like glossed over as I was reading, and it's so fast paced. You almost can't stop once you start. It just like is go from the beginning to the end. And so if we had a little more time to world build and get to know characters and stuff, I think I could have loved it even more. But that being said, I still really recommend it. If you want a horror that has a lot of commentary on real life horror, I would recommend it. And last one, and coincidentally my favorite of the month, and that is Slewfoot by Brahm. I would actually say that I think this and The Adventures of Minina alsarfi are like tied for first. This one is following our main character Abatha, and she is living in a Puritan society and it's 1666, I want to say. Her and her husband are tending the land, and one day her brother-in-law comes over and he basically says that he messed up and he's lost all his money to this lord, and so he's going to sell their land and make them work for this lord to pay off his debts. And they only have one payment left, so they believe it's unfair, so they are kind of fighting against him to get what they want. And it's a lot about Abatha and her struggle as a woman in this society and being heard, and the things that are so restrictive of her and women and just like the people in general. There's so much they can't do because for fear of the devil. And then at the same time, you're getting a perspective of a spirit in the forest where these other little spirits are awakening it and telling it that it needs blood, it needs human blood, and it needs to go kill. It's just a very interesting story. It's a witchy story. It's got a lot packed into it. I would say it's slower, yet also at the same time gets wild towards the end. I think Brahm did something that I always look for in my books, which is he made me feel so much in just a short amount of time. Like right away I felt connected to Abatha and wanted to see her story, and I wanted her to get her revenge on these people. He made me hate characters so much. The brother-in-law Wallace, I just hated him so much. I truly felt all the range of emotions while reading this, and that to me is a sign of good story. And I put it down and I just could not think of anything else. So yeah, I have to say that this is a new favorite horror and I'm just obsessed. So that is Slewfoot, and that's the last book I read this month. If I didn't already say that, it's 5 stars. But yeah, here are all the books I read in the month of October. It was my best reading month yet. I'm hoping because it's cold I will just keep on with reading a ton because I'm having a great time. That is all the books I have. I hope you had a great reading month, and I hope that you're doing well as well, and I will see you next time.